Am I in the right spot if I just stand still? Thank you, Cable Access, for coming to film. My name is Jennifer Wallace-Broder, and I work for AARP Vermont, and welcome to the public presentation of our Active Living Workshop. We actually held a day-long event today at the hospital, and folks who participated in that, could you raise your hand? So for those of you who didn't, here are all the people that you can get the skinny from. We're going to report out our findings from the day, but there's probably nothing like asking somebody who was there to share information about their experience in this workshop. But we brought Dan Burton, who's a national expert on walkable and livable communities, to look at Canal Street in Brattleboro and how we can make that more walkable, more accessible, more inviting as a gateway to this lovely community coming off of Exit 1, and more prosperous in terms of economic development. So there are a number of components we were looking at. From our perspective at AARP, we're primarily interested in mobility issues, how people get around when they can no longer drive or when they are they cut back on driving. And in a community like Brattleboro, where you have the bones of a great pedestrian infrastructure, this is a great opportunity to make sure that people who are getting out of their car still can get around the community, stay connected, do the things that they want to do. We do know that the data shows us that when people stop driving, their connection to the community really drops off, and that can lead to fairly unpleasant outcomes in terms of isolation and reduced connection to the community. And it really doesn't have to be that way. You have the power to provide the options that people need to get around, and walkability is a really key component. I'd like to actually point out Joyce Lanier here. She's with the COSEV, is that how you say it? For Southeastern Vermont. And they work day and night trying to get people where they need to go. So it's definitely a challenge for people as they get older. And this is one way we can make our community more livable for people who are not driving. So that's our real interest in this particular activity. We wanted to bring the Active Living Workshop to Brattleboro. Brattleboro actually applied in a competitive process to have this opportunity. There are several communities around the state that wanted to put in applications. Brattleboro was definitely at the top of the pile. So I'd just like to congratulate the town planning staff, Rod Francis and Sue Fillion, for putting in a very successful application. And we are really grateful that they wanted to follow through on getting the grant because we literally met 2 days after the hurricane to make our selection, and we were really worried that Brattleboro, that was so outstanding, might not have the capacity to do the workshop, and they totally stepped up, and we're really, really, really psyched that they were able to do that, and it says volumes about this community, actually. So congratulations again.
And then you arrived on the day of the first snowstorm.
That's right. It's just one weather event after another here. So in addition to having Dan here helping to work on this particular part of town, AARP is going to grant $3,000 to the community to help implement one of the recommendations that comes out of the workshop and the further discussion here this evening. And AARP is going to be involved as much as we can to help you see some of the recommendations come to life, come to fruition. And you have some great resources in this community, like Steve Fortier with the Healthy Communities Coalition and others that are also going to be really focused on this. So I really am very optimistic about the future here and the future at Canal Street. So with that said, I want to introduce Dan Burton, the main attraction, our wonderful expert. Dan Burton is an internationally recognized authority on bicycle and pedestrian facilities and programs, walkability, livability, sustainability, and smart growth. He is not only an expert on this, he worked at the Florida Department of Transportation as their bike ped coordinator for 16 years, but he's also a photographer. He's a National Geographic photographer, actually. So he has tremendous skills to bring a visual component to this whole thing to you. So he takes photos everywhere he goes. He has a vast library of examples to show you tonight. And he's also going to provide a photomorph of Canal Street showing what you could potentially see based on the things that everybody said they'd like to have in that area. So that will be part of the recommendations. He's worked in over 3,500 North American communities, large and small. So he has pretty much has seen it all, and again has a ton of examples to show you. Time magazine named Burton as one of the 6 most important civic innovators in the world. And in 2001, he was selected by the Transportation Research Board as their distinguished lecturer on rebuilding transportation around walkability. He is absolutely a fabulous resource to have in your community, a fabulous resource for us here in Vermont. And I'm just thrilled to bring him here to work with you on making Brattleboro even more walkable and livable in the future. So here's Dan, and he's going to share what they learned today.
Thank you, Jennifer, and good evening, Brattleboro. Good evening, Brattleboro. Good evening. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I want to make sure I'm in the right place, and want to also thank all of those of you who did take part today. It was, to me, it was very energizing. And so with a shortage of time to bring about the change we need, I'm going to go right into the presentation. Could someone get the lights for me? Is that all right?
Yep.
And I want to start with the whole notion or concept that the world we built, certainly from our imagination, should have children being able to run free and a great place to raise families and meet people and lively, healthy retail shops. But the gentleman that's looking out on that scene, perhaps imagining all those things, is standing in a make-believe place. It's Disney World. And it's not real. And so when we think of, well, what is the real picture, it's very different. Seemingly endless lines of traffic, especially on weekends and times when we want to go somewhere. Parents having to rush their child across the street. When we look out on the visual soup, it's a mess and a failure to have put in the right accommodations for people to live healthy lives. So what the AARP has helped assemble and put together with this workshop with 2 models in all of Vermont are hopes and inspirations that these models will inspire all communities throughout Vermont to be able to engage and rebuild according to our hearts, to understand what it is we value the most. And if it happens to be nature, our own families, children, active living, and things like that, then we'll take the things that we failed to invest in and make those investments and bring back healthy economies and healthy people. So that's really what this is all about. And I think it's important to state that with this, most people express, in fact, I was just reading this in the internet tonight, 80% of Americans, when you describe what sustainable communities are, and you describe them this way, they're for it. There's 6% that say they're against it, and the others just aren't sure. Well, it's time that we all became sure of what we want, or otherwise we'll become more of what we've become. And that's not good. So I'm very pleased to be part of the AARP team. We're working in quite a number of states already and starting to see some real traction come out of the people in the communities. I want to start, though, where I think many things started to break down. You can't pinpoint where we are in any beginning year, but to me personally, it's that point in which we turned our affairs over to the experts to be in charge of our future. So we have experts in traffic, we have experts in planning, we have experts in architecture and economics and so on, and they don't talk to one another. And the net result is we've written off the citizen as having a voice, a heart, a sensitivity of what we need to build. And when we do that, then the experts go amok, and they really do. So I want to talk about a set of people that are taking a different approach. These folks sitting at the table, the executive director and the assistant director for the Michigan Municipal League are pulling their cities together by building place. And that's exactly what we're talking about tonight. Of course, we're talking about walkability, livability, and sustainable, and all these things. But we're really talking about how do we transform an area, starting with Canal, and make it into a place where people want to be, to pass through, but to spend time. And the reason for doing this is that this really does represent the future of our economy in our country. That it's going to be small and rural and hometown. It's going to be one neighborhood at a time, and it's going to be based on what we care about. Raising families, having a place where we can mature and enjoy life. And so a lot of people, and we don't know the actual percentage, but it's well above 50% of America would move somewhere if they could find the right place. Now, other folks have settled in and they're not about to move, so they just want to stay in place and make it better. And that's what I'm hopeful that we're seeing here tonight, that people want to improve. I also want to set a philosophy or tone with this presentation. Alexander von Humboldt, who we named the Humboldt Current after, a gentleman who really understood the earth. He would travel in clipper ships and was a botanist, and he named many of the plants that we now appreciate and enjoy. But Humboldt was a fellow who hung out with Tom Jefferson. And the two of them would get into deep philosophical discussions about America and about how people could approach the future in a better way. And I thought of no better quote to go by for the times we're in than what Humboldt declared back in the 1700s. And I think as we stop to think about that the mess we created because we lost our mark. We lost our ability to see, to focus on those things that matter to us the most. And if we now accept the fact that our true happiness means getting that back, then we're going to approach the future without fear. We're going to do it with a certain order and understanding. Now, I've been doing this for a long time. This is one of the early communities I got to work with. It's West Palm Beach, Florida. When we did the workshop, that's the street on which they filmed the movie Crack America. That's where they were. Anyone that could have fled the city, who had resources to do so, had. Leaving behind the drug dealers, the gangs, the prostitutes, and so on and so forth. After this community pulled together a vision, 4 years later, that area looks like this. People who are developers, who are investors, want to invest where people have a vision and they're ready to act on it. And one developer alone brought in $1.3 billion, and this is now a fairly prosperous community. My good friend Linda Polanski bought the street you see on the right and bought the entire block for $150,000 down. By working with the business owner across the street and agreeing to fix the buildings, the city agreed to fix the street. And within 1 year, Linda was worth $15 million.
Are there cars on that street now?
Only certain hours. Yeah.
Wow.
And so she bought the next block. And that street now looks like this. And she bought the next block. Do you see where I'm going with this, folks? Linda is now retired, worth $45 million off of a $150,000 investment because she believed in working with other people, pulling together a team, and making something out of a great historic area. Now, I want to go down a different road. Can I get everyone here to pretend that it's the 1400s? Galileo, Copernicus are alive. And they study math and the solar system, and they say, you know, this can't be. It just does not work mathematically. But am I right, folks? You live in the 1400s. This is absolutely correct. There is no other view of the universe. There can't be. Am I right? Work with me on this. Yeah. Okay. Of course. This is, though, what they proved that had to be. Now, think about that. That was the 1400s. And Galileo was actually led through the torture chambers, told to clean up his act, which he did. And but today we know better because it's not the 1400s. Now I'm going to propose something equally ludicrous. What if this isn't true? What if all economies absolutely do not rotate around our dependence on the car? And what if instead they rotate around people? That people are the basis of a sound economy. Now, if that's true, then we get back health. We get back choice in transportation. We reduce our dependency on oil. We build communities that are easily compact and work, and so on and so forth. So I like to say, if we're going to have that, or we're going to have anything we're in love with, then we have to come together to act and have a dream, and a vision will guide us. And with that, then we put together a plan that gives us hope, gives us a reason to go forward. But what we're going to talk about most tonight is it gives us the opportunity to bring together a team. And I know that you've done planning work on canal before, but it's never come to fruition. And that's the next step, and that's why we're all coming together. Our first big project with AARP was in the wonderful state of Alabama, in a fairly conservative country where people say, well, these people can't make decisions based on a number of things. And it just turns out not to be true. They had this road, and as we learned during the day, it was to be widened to 5 lanes, which would make it look like this, which would not allow them to build a village, which means people would drive more, not less. So talking with the traffic engineer that night and then the community, they said, nope, we don't want that. And the engineer said rather painfully, well, it's at 90% plans. And that usually means the cement trucks are already warming up. So they were able to pull the 2 communities together, and within 100 days, that's our goal, they were able to envision, and now we'll act on building this. Build villages, don't build traffic. It's such a simple solution. Another town, this is one that we worked in a few years back. It's called Chico, California. It's a wonderful college there, Chico State, isn't it? Mm-hmm. And this is what they're stuck with. And what they talked through and were willing to do is to transform that into this. Now, this is the same size, the same scale, the same opportunity as Canal.
So that's really there now?
It's not there yet, but they're putting all the pieces in stage. But this vision is ready to go forward. Now, the next part of the equation is just to know history, that we created downtowns and they worked. And then there came a time where we said downtowns aren't good. Let's create strips. They look like this, and that's partly what Canal looks like. And now what we're saying is that doesn't work. It doesn't give enough energy to make it work, and there's no place for people to go. So what eventually we're likely to do, and that's our discussion here tonight, is how do we now create the stage, the code, the practices that actually get us to where we have places people can live, shop, and have good transit and so on. So that means that we'll take an area that people might refer to as a rural paradise, and they move to the country for this, and then realize, oh my gosh, we didn't get paradise, we got schlock. And then be willing to say there's got to be a better definition of what a good walkable place, healthy place would be. And then so we do an overlay over that, and notice we're able to even rescue and save many of the buildings. but now define a great center, a great place to walk along and to feel watched over and so on. So these are the people that made it happen. I'm impressed that they came together, they built the energies, brought you together. Some of you were praying, I think. And but there's a great expression of hope and direction, and how can we get from there to here, or here to there. And not a big group, but a group that was substantial and diverse and talented. And that there were a lot of discussions that occurred as we walked and talked and kicked some dirt and figured some things out. And truly, people that see the future in a different way than just basically trying to touch a few little things up. And being able to see what is out there and why we don't want to continue with that. And so these are all scenes taken in the corridor. And I think everybody in this room knows very well what the corridor looks like, acts like, feels like. Sidewalks that are broken, sidewalks that are too narrow, sidewalks that are so close to the danger. And truly, so many driveways, so many challenges that it's hard to imagine how we could rescue a place like this. But rescue it we will, and rescue it we'll do very well once we start to craft a vision that gives us a way to have an approach, a gateway, a meaningful area as we come on into town. So, a little bit of a message, just in summary, that if you plan your cities for cars and traffic, you'll get cars and traffic. You tried that, it works. Am I right?
Yeah, sure.
But if you now go back to what our great-grandparents did, and you plan your cities for people and places, then you get people and places. It's such a simple formula that if you want less of something, you have to provide an alternative. And the alternative is a very healthy thing. And so Vermonters seem to get this. They want to walk through, bike through, and live in places where they do have that choice. Now, it's not as though this is all brand new knowledge or information. Jane Jacobs herself declared this in 1961, which is what, 50 years ago? And she's right. We have to understand the complexities of our cities and stop blaming the car for our problems. We need to blame ourselves, though, if we're going to do the right thing. So I'm going to show you some transitions. This is basically how we do it. This happens to be in Sacramento. It's called Hurley Way. You start by redefining the edges. In this case, we ran the traffic number. We could take 2 lanes out as long as we put in a roundabout, and then green it up, and then really, truly set the stage for much higher value and able to get good buildings in and really start to define a place. So, roughly stated, looking from a visual air of a New England type of community, we can see the car dependency on the left-hand side and the people focus on the right-hand side. And here's the amazing thing and why it works. What's on the left, you can only rent out for $5 to $15 a square foot. And some Vermont communities are not able to rent it out for even that. And for this, though, you can rent it out for much higher, typically $25 to $65 per square foot. And now, if it doesn't make all the sense from the air, look at what it looks like from the ground. Automobile related or people related. And this is one, by the way, I think makes over $100 per square foot. It's Schlossberg, which is in California, heart of the wine country. Okay, so what would that look like if, say, we went down to, is it the Fairgrounds intersection?
Yeah, Fairground
Road, yeah. So just imagine what you got there, and it's somewhat like this, it's not exactly. But if you now, through working on it, setting new code, new vision, work to get something more like this, now it's a people place. It's a place that's organized, it has a certain structure to it, it works from a vision, and you can write code that supports it. Now, to go with that, another brand new concept in our country is to build streets for more than one use. We call them complete streets. They're for anyone of any ability, people of all ages, all uses. People can switch out whichever mode of transportation they want at a given moment. Now, to do this, we need a broader palette of tools and to mix and match the tools. So note here we have every one of these streets breaking the basic rule that you build the roads as big and wide and fat as you can. In this case, they shrunk them as much as they felt that they could. They got down to 10-foot lanes. The one on the top is actually a 9-foot lane. And we now know that on the very category of road that canal is, that is as safe, probably a little safer than any other combination. Now, by doing this, we now can give ourselves permission to put in some things in the street that otherwise we'd say, well, where are we going to find room for that? So we'll talk about that. Ideally and hopefully, we would see a canal that has 10-foot travel lanes, a 10-foot storage lane, occasional crossings, crossing islands, and might have dedicated color just for the bike lanes. This is not that great of a stretch of an imagination, and this fits in a reasonable right-of-way. And to that, because you only own, say, 50 feet of right-of-way, then we would need to work with adjacent property owners to widen the physical realm so that we don't have to have attached sidewalks, so that you have a place to store snow. I'm sorry? That's 60.
60 feet?
So we'd have to work for another 10 feet, working with property owners to increase the value of the land, that's the trade, and to be able to get in sufficient width to do what we want. In reality, it looks more like this. That particular median is much narrower on purpose. But notice the 10-foot lanes, brand new road, 6-foot bike lanes, a narrow planter strip, and again, a place where you could put the snow, and then the sidewalk. In this case, that's all the right-of-way we owned, so we had to stay within that, as you see here. In another section of the same road, you can see that we still kept the 10-foot lanes, put in bike lanes, and that's what saves the sidewalk. Imagine if the traffic was right up next against the sidewalk, what it would feel like to walk there. I know what question you're asking. That's why I put this image in here. Well, can you do that on the state road? Of course. Otherwise, I wouldn't be showing you this picture. This is Hamburg, New York. The travel lanes are 9 feet wide. The parking is only 6 feet wide, but it's important. And then to keep the roads or the lanes look narrow, we purposely created what we call a transition lane. It's not wide enough to be a bike lane. And our goal was to take out all the traffic signals, put in roundabouts, which we did, 4, and now people drive through town at a lower speed and they get through town sooner. And the lower speed people travel, the more likely they are to shop for a parking space and to go in and spend money in a shop. So this is Hamburg, New York. And again, 9-foot travel lanes. You can see how they work, how they feel. And many of those are brand new buildings, by the way. And so they're really doing well. Then the question comes up, well, aren't there any trucks on this road? Yes, this is a major truck route. And so we show a truck with a UPS truck pull over, and they have absolutely no problem getting past one another. And this is the point, is we're not going to design a road that wouldn't work for all uses, all people, all the time. That's what a complete street is. It doesn't leave anybody out of the picture, including the semi-tractor trailer operator. Another tool we might want to consider is what we call a colorize center lane. It makes the lanes look narrower. So Manitou Springs in Colorado has done exactly that. This used to be 4 lanes, and they knocked it down to 3 and make it look like it's only 2, and now make crossings very easy. Since they did this, their retail trade in their shops jumped about 30%. So again, bring the speeds down and bring the people back. and it's very attractive and very functional. This is Manitou Springs in Colorado.
They have their little iron policemen in the road too, if you notice.
Yes, they do. Now, another thing that Manitou did, which I love, is they put in a flat roundabout. It's not totally flat. It's raised about 3.5 inches. But the point is, this intersection is tight enough they couldn't get a regular raised roundabout in. So they said, well, we still want the motors to slow and to circulate, which they're doing, but we still have to have a big semi-turn occasionally. So this is what they were able to do, invent a new tool. And you could do this in a couple places in Brattleboro, not far from where we're standing right at this moment. And motorists would behave a lot better than they did tonight when Anita and I were working our way here. So think about it. There are more tools and good things that you can do. Now, a little more with the tools. Notice again, my suggestion is go to the default of 10-foot lanes. And then if you have a specific need to go up to 11, then do it. But don't start with 11 or 12 and then come down. That's stupid. Now let's talk about our findings. And in this case, with a very sharp eye and a good radar gun, we found out that a lot of people were going between 35 and 45 in a 25 zone. And that we have major left turning conflicts at Belmont. And we looked at the issues of viewing Canal as a thoroughfare, but one that can be now transformed into one that's very livable. I think it's important to point out that if we first of all take our study area from Maple Street all the way to Fairground Road, that there are too many driveways. We have poor visibility at a lot of intersections and a lot of traffic congestion that shouldn't occur if we put in the right tools to eliminate the congestion. That would include a roundabout. That we see some challenges. The signalized crossing does not work well. In fact, for whatever reason, today we found it on flash. It was on flash yesterday, every time I've seen it. Do they ever activate it? Do they? Okay. Do we know why it's on flash? It's broken. Okay. Okay. But meanwhile, we're seeing a lot of folks just doing what they have to do in order to get across the street because there are insufficient crossings and very little support. And so, you know, we know it's broken. We need better bike facilities. Sidewalks need a better snow removal. And how do you do that when it's only 4 foot wide? We need beautification, more plantings. So I'm going to do a countdown backwards like David Letterman. So this is number 4. And so bike lanes was one of the items that you felt that you could get done in the next 111 days. We chose that because tonight is 11/1/11. Is that cool? So we gave you an extra 11 bonus days. Otherwise, you would have only gotten 100 days. So within 111 days, we challenge you to figure out a way to change the striping to go from something like this to something like this. The width is out there to do it. We tested that out today. Just wanted to share with you that if you make the road look less wide, people drive differently. They really do. These happen to be, this one happens to be in Germany, and that red paint has been on the ground for close to 20 years, and they use plows in Germany. But you can, over more time, upgrade it to where you extend the gutter pan, and now you have a visual effect that lasts for as long as the road lasts. And you do saw cut instead of trowel cut, a couple other things you do. And now you get the speeds down. And there are a lot of other benefits of bike lanes, and among them you now have more border width, more separation from fixed objects. But there's a whole plethora of benefits of bike lanes. There are 22 actually, and only 2 are for the bicyclist. So notice, if I'm a motorist and I want to turn, I get the extra bonus turning radius from this point to this point. And so better turns into driveways, better turns out of driveways, better sight lines in and out of properties, all just a bonus of moving the lanes over and coming up with a better cross-section. Number 3 in the countdown, to have the Canal Street be a gateway. And an important gateway, because this really announces whether or not you should bother coming on into town or just turn around and realize that there's got to be another town that doesn't look like everywhere else. So this is an example of a gateway into University Place, Washington. And again, notice that everything we're talking about is what they're doing. They plant more trees, and in their case, they work with their terrain, their vertical terrain. They have a beautiful terminating vista, a roundabout. So let's talk about gateways. The gateways truly identify whether or not you've arrived in a place of pride, uniqueness, character, personality. And there are many ways to do it. You start with something that's as simple as a very high-quality sign, perhaps with some historic lamps, whatever denotes arrival in Brattleboro. And this, I think, is achievable within 111 days. And you might even make it a contest for a design by some of the arts students in town. You can then do wayfinding and help people figure out important destinations, distances, things like that can all be identified. But then you can start working longer term and get a true median on canal and decorate the edges with flowers, put nice trees in, lamps, the whole works. You could go another step and say on the Hospital Hill, you could do a mounding of the earth because there are really no turns to be made as people come up the hill. There's just really nowhere to turn into. So that can be even a greater pronouncement. And you, on the ends, can create a narrowing with the whole idea that you want to slow everyone down. We used a number of strategies on this one. First of all, we had a pre-area that was a rumble, and then we put a good crop of trees and ground cover in, and then as you look toward the sides, that's all what we call grasscrete. It's a very stable surface that would never get muddy, and you could drive vehicles on it if you had to in an emergency and with no challenge or problem whatsoever. So a lot of thought went into this, but it really did bring the speeds down. You can see again using things like a nice line of trees and the median. And look how narrow that road is. The visual effect is it's only 9-foot lines. They're actually 10, but they feel like they're 9. You could, in some locations, create a sense of arrival with an island, like you see here. It's called a short median. And then obviously work with each of the property owners to create a distinctive edge, one that's quality. This is Meredith in New Hampshire. I know we're not allowed to talk about New Hampshire, but Meredith, we can talk about. You can have iconic columns and other features that celebrate your history and or your uniqueness, using whatever materials or approaches you think are appropriate for your community. And again, give people a keen sense of arrival. Now we're up to number 2. And with number 2, the idea is to work with property owners to build that team that you seek in order to pull together the partnering in order to go forward with the ideas that will come first in the 111 days, but also which will come later. We talked about the value of leading more walking audits, of having a little bit of structure, coming up with polishing off some plans, perhaps walking door to door where it's appropriate, and to work out true new ideas with the people that matter. And then finally, number 1 on our list, a little bit of drum roll here. a crossing island and get at least one in within 111 days. It could be very simple. You could go from a thin median and bike lanes and have something like this, very distinctive, very identifiable. That is not expensive, by the way. And typically states have the capability of putting those into a shorter term budget. You could do something that adds more of a sense of place. And notice this one, on purpose, the crossing is bent at 45 degrees so that you force the pedestrian or trail user to look squarely into the eyes of the motorist. This happens to be in Grand Junction, Colorado, snow country for sure. And again, notice the colorized bike lanes.
And the lines, horizontal lines in the travel lane, those are?
These are referred to as the Seminole markings, named after Seminole County, Florida. One of my earlier bosses dreamed that up. It creates an illusion to the driver that they're going faster than they actually are.
Yeah.
So they slow down. And you could also do medians where you create a shadow effect, a pocket, so that, again, you're breaking the journey into two easily achievable steps. All of these images I'm showing you, I could not have shown you 20 years ago. Many of them I could not have shown them to you 5 years ago.
Really?
So you're seeing America transform as we walk and talk. And again, notice this sidewalk, which is okay if you have the bike lane, not okay if you don't. You could also put in some architecture in your islands. This happens to be for sun purposes. That's Tucson, Arizona, where it gets up to 120 degrees quite often. And but you would probably use it for snow, right? And now we'll talk a little bit about the items that go along with this, transforming a lot of asphalt into a lot of what we call a pocket park or a pocket part of a neighborhood. So you can bring back just a couple little stores. So when I'm talking about placemaking, I'm just talking about how do we get this kind of an investment to come back and to really start to define us. Now you could do this in other parts of Brattleboro, of course, but there are places that are just begging for place in the corridor itself. And here's the cool thing. Once this was done, it raised the value of properties in the neighborhood within a 5-minute walk. That people now had a destination. They had a place to come to. Their homes were worth more money as a result. Place doesn't have to be big. It just needs to be carefully thought through. Quite often it needs to be green. It has to have some public art. That was another thing we talked about today. Trees, we decided are our friends. Urban street trees do a lot to help slow traffic and help to define pride and place and arrival. For example, if a scene looks like this, you've got a place to ride a bike or walk, but when it looks like this, you have place, which is so much more. And now you have a real feeling of separation that you really do matter. We also talked about roundabouts, a tool that is becoming very popular, but it needs to be understood. So this is the first roundabout in the state of Washington, and now we're up to close to 300. And that was put in around 1999, so I think you can see how fast we're able to transform. New York State, this is one of the first roundabouts. And again, notice how it works. It sets features that slow the motorist down and create a very high interest for the motorist to yield to pedestrians. We can see that. Notice the pedestrian, as she steps out, isn't waiting for a signal. She's watching, and there's only a chance of a vehicle coming one way, and at low speed. And as she's stepping toward the center, the third motorist back realizes she's about to cross, so he just waits. He says, well, where am I going to go anyway? And by the time she's out of the street, she has not held back a single motorist. Now compare that to this intersection down here that I don't understand. Roundabouts can fit in fairly snug places. This one we put in, and it moves 21,000 cars every day. 21,000.
It's not very big either, that roundabout.
And it's not big. It doesn't need to be big. It just needs to be correctly designed. It helps make bicycling popular again. Again, it brings the speeds down to bicycling speed. It's a very short crossing for the pedestrian and virtually no weight and a very high yield for motorists who are going fairly slow.
Yeah.
Yes?
On your previous slide, you just showed a roundabout like the one we have at exit 3, which is a 2-lane roundabout.
Yeah, don't get me talking about that roundabout.
I was just wondering, did they ever work? Does that one work?
This one works beautifully. A 2-lane roundabout can work, but you've got a 3-lane roundabout. Well, Keene has a 3-lane. I think
We have
you've got an
two-lane
extra
roundabout,
right
but it has
turn.
dedicated right turn lanes.
Yeah, those are,
Right.
what are you trying to be, Chicago? You know? But that's pretty well designed. That is a 2-lane roundabout. We modeled that and tested it for a 1-lane roundabout. And then somebody came along and buggered it up and said, oh, no, we have to have 2 lanes. No, they didn't. But the point is, though, we still made it very, very good on the side streets, and it's actually quite a good design overall. Now, this one came from a 5-lane road carrying 23,000 cars. You're only trying to move 9,000 on Canal. So we went from 5 lanes down to 2, and I think, you can see how much superior it is for a person to be able to get across the street. Roundabouts do act as gateways. They're very attractive, beautiful, charming. You can change them for each season. Now, another big thing we talked about while we were out there is you can do everything for the road and have it be a little more walkable, but you're not going to have a village. You have to have a destination. So we talked a lot about buildings and where the buildings sit and why that matters. That you're not going to walk comfortably along this, correct? But if the building sits correctly, then you feel very good about being there. So this is your opportunity block. I might call it your missed opportunity block. But just to really share with you that with your code in place and no waivers, then you could end up with a building like this or like this on the remaining 3 quadrants. And over time, rescue the corner that was violated. And again, these are very simple things. These stores, by the way, make huge money because they build community. People want to go to them, and they become natural attractions.
They're not local people that are really using corporations.
But you decide what you will accept.
Well, that's why we don't have a Walmart. Hinsdale decided to have that.
Okay, but if you have a Walgreens, you decide whether you want a Walgreens that's pushed back or whether you want it to hold the corner. And that's what these towns decided. Davidson and Northville, Michigan. It's your choice. It's not the corporation's choice. Now, if you take the price chopper and think about that, that's a strip, right? All the buildings are set back. You can rescue that. And so this is an example of where that was done. Notice the buildings. They're liner buildings. They're only about 20 feet deep. And this is what it feels like now to walk up and down the street. It's a totally different feeling than when the buildings don't occupy the street, don't hold the street, and fail to watch over and create the kind of theater that naturally occurs when you get the buildings in the right location. And again, notice these are also grocers. Safeway is a grocer. And these buildings here make more money per square foot than anything being sold inside of the actual Safeway further back. Again, they're all dictated by a code. We want them to be orderly. We want the back side, the B side we call it, the utilities, to really be reflective of being place and now help hold the street together and make it a very desirable place. We talked a little bit about connectivity, that you've got some broken connections, especially on the hospital side of Canal, and that over time you have opportunities to correct that, but that will take more than 111 days, unless you know how to do miracles. We talked about the value of mini circles. These are all mini circles that honor and respect the neighborhoods. And now I'd like to do a little bit of a closing and talk about the challenges you're going to face, because this is what challenge all towns face. This is a town in Michigan that has a road very similar to yours, but they're lacking a sidewalk. This is Sault Ste. Marie, and the Michigan DOT wanted to put in a sidewalk to help the children get to school. And the citizens of this neighborhood came out in droves to say, we don't want a sidewalk because that would make us look urban. We're rural. And so they never got the sidewalk.
Wow.
And they pointed out there was a sidewalk on the other side of the street. Okay, how do you get to it? And so now their children are being driven to school, and no one who is older has the ability to go out and exercise. There's just simply no way to get. So we need to keep this in mind, that we need to figure out what we're for and work toward it, and not to figure out what we're against and continue to erode the quality of our lives and our health. I want to point out that many of you who came today are our core problem-solving group. That some of you will stay with the group, and others will say, nope, time to move on to something else. Others will join and help work on different projects and tasks. And I would hope that your 111 days, that you broaden the group to this easily, that you will have further input, additional meetings, and additional people drawn in for the purpose of the meetings, and then they'll work with the media and be able to have outreach to the entire community. That's how you end up with a process where people don't come out and say, we don't want to have traffic move slower on Canal. That everybody was informed and they had the opportunity, and they say, well, if you do it, make sure you still allow access to driveways and things like that. Now I want to close with a couple of stories. The woman that you see in the lower part of the photo, Nina Schlossberg, a former TV producer, now sits on the board of directors for the North Carolina Department of Transportation. And she's perhaps the leading woman in the state for getting the governor reelected. No one would run for city council or the mayorship of Raleigh without having a solid wink from Nina. And how did she get there? She basically went out to rescue a street. It's called Hillsborough Street. It's the street in all of North Carolina that takes more lives than any other street. She rescued that street, and today there are over $200 million of new projects coming to that street because the street was transformed. And that street isn't much different than Canal. The woman you see in the middle, a recent immigrant to America from Haiti. Very sadly, a child was killed on her street by a car, speeding car. So she grabbed the tin can, walked door to door, met with her neighbors, and gathered $2,500. She then took it to a foundation, and they matched it. Now they're up to 5. They took it to the city, and they matched it, and now we're up to 10. And then one of the city councilors who knew me asked if we could match it, so now they're up to 20. We did the plan, and this autumn they started an $850,000 project based on the fact that they had a plan to go forward. So they were in the chute at the right time because of one woman who wanted something better for children than what happened in front of her eyes. And so this street, just as an example, will look much more like this and become a much healthier place. That's New Haven. Now, we talk about, could getting involved in this project prolong your life? And I'm serious about this. People have a purpose in life, on average, live 7 years longer than anybody else. And that's what's happening to these people, I think. I was driving through part of California, Northern California, one evening, saw this group out building a trail. So I went up and took a lot of photos and then asked them, why are you building this trail? This is a pretty difficult thing to do. I said, well, we started because our county road no longer was being maintained by our county. And after a while, the postmaster refused to deliver mail. So we formed a small nonprofit group and went out and fixed our road. And then we became friends, and now we look for a project every weekend to continue to do our work. And so they have a purpose, and it's working. Another story, I was in Bend, Oregon, and watching a lot of things, but I kept watching these children with clipboards. They'd huddle together, and they'd sit down, and they'd draw. And they'd get up, and they'd move to another site, and they'd sit down and huddle, and they'd draw. And they were doing this all morning, so I went up to the teacher and I said, what are the children doing? She said, well, Dan, the children are learning how to design a city. This is where we need to start so that we have informed voters, informed residents that understand the value of a street that works for all people and that they can live in their town and be very proud of it for all of their years. So in a moment, we'll turn on the lights, ask what further questions you have, what further insights. Going to ask Anita Jenkins, who was going to write the plan, to take down any of your thoughts or ideas. Do we have a way to do that, Anita? Mm-hmm. Okay. And then finally, before you leave, we'll have some sheets, and we hope that those of you who would like to would sign up to be committed to working on a committee. It doesn't mean you'll be on the committee, it just means that you submit your name. And then very likely be asked if you have the time and resource to do that. And if you don't have, then at least please sign up to assist so that we have the strength in numbers. So with that, let's go ahead and get the lights. Was that helpful, folks?
Yeah.
Okay.
What was the city in North Carolina again? We're in Hillsborough?
Raleigh. Wasn't that where Mayberry Sheriff Andy Griffith would talk about Raleigh every once in a while? The capital? Yes, ma'am.
So, have you already gone to the individual business owners on Canal Street to inquire with
No,
them?
no, not today. We really are just testing things out and leaving you in charge. That some eloquent group of people, once you get a vision together that holds water, that you would then go around and talk to the business owners.
'Cause my concern would be, this is all very elegant, but you are talking about raising the value of that area, which indeed would raise the taxes.
It would, and it means their land would be worth more money. And that if they want to get loans, they can get loans. And that if they want to retire, pass on the business to an offspring or someone else, that they'd now be in a position to do that. I think the important thing is if we want to be a poor people and pay low taxes, that's a choice, and we can do that. But if we want to be prosperous and grow our community and grow other people's businesses, then we work together and realize, yeah, we'll end up paying more taxes, and it means that we'll be more successful. And if one community doesn't and another does, then the trade goes to that community that does. Yes?
It might be helpful to go over that list that you whittled down to 4 so that everybody can have the benefit of what we were thinking of.
Yes, the bigger list. And Anita, do you want to help us out on that?
I just happen to have it with me. So we had several items on the list, and we actually, after we formed the list, by a show of hands, everyone had 3 votes. So by a show of hands, we went around our circle and voted on the priorities. And the entire list, here's one that made the list, was to build relationship with the property owners. This one was to extend the median along Canal Street. When you come off of exit 1, there's a median, so to extend that. This kind of goes, the public and private partnership with the hospital was focused on the crossing there near the hospital. So that was a comment that was made, and then we moved it to what the whole comment was really to do the crossing near the hospital and to partner with them. There was ideas to engage the Career Center to do more of the plantings along Canal Street. I said high school, but it was the Career Center. To slow traffic on Hospital Hill. So that was some traffic calming around that area. To do additional wayfinding. When Dan and I came into the community off of exit 1, we couldn't find the hospital. We saw one blue H right when we came off, and then we couldn't see it again. So wayfinding was important. Also bike storage. Along with bike lanes, there's a need for bike storage, bike racks to lock your bikes up when you actually get to the destination. Over on this page, we have one of the top one, actually the top one, was crossings. And when we went through and defined all of the challenges, crossings, I kept underlying crossings because that just was an issue that continued to come up, is we can't safely cross the street. And this one, the pork chop, I was just seeing who was paying attention. So there was a mention about the pork chop at the light where you have the right slip turn lane. Needed to fix that some, and I was just seeing who was paying attention, so I said fix pork chops for dinner or at the traffic light.
Either one.
Yeah.
Right now I'd go for the pork chop for dinner.
Maybe you're good.
And then we had the gateway to involve all the property owners, and also to get some public art on the street was important as well. And also one of your priorities, the last one here, was bike lanes. So that was the full list in the time that we had. We probably could have kept going, but we had a limited time to come up with this list. So we came up with this list, and then we prioritized it. And that was the top 4 that you saw in the presentation.
Great question. So, yes, sir.
And one thing that popped out during your examples that you showed was, I felt was a noticeable lack of signalization and turn lanes in your examples of walkable and livable streets. Could you talk about the relationship between signalization, turn lanes, and livability and walkability?
Yes. Well, the very important thing about having signals is that right now it's been the only tool we've used. We got somewhat good at doing them, but yours aren't the best. And it's just true. You've got old concepts in your signals and things like that. So our general recommendation is, over time, get rid of the signal, create a roundabout, which has many benefits for all users. They move 30% more traffic, 90% gain in safety, more supportive of walking, bicycling, adds value to the properties, becomes a gateway. The left turn lanes, which you have a few of, are very important. Your alternative would be to have a 4-lane road. And with a 4-lane road, people who are making a left turn are sitting in an active lane. And so when you go to a turn pocket, it's much safer. So you're halfway there. If you wanted to now bring the speeds down while having the left turn lanes, then you might do something, as I showed, to colorize them, so that they don't look like they're a big part of the mass of the road. And by doing this very thoughtfully, you can get in true crossing islands for pedestrians. You pay attention, for example, where the motors do need to make a left turn, and provide that. And then let's say, and is it Belmont? At Belmont, coming upgrade, there's a need, obviously, to turn right into the hospital. There's a need to turn left into the hospital. but there may not be a need to turn left out of Belmont coming the other way, so you could put in a really good crossing there. And the reason that that would work is you, on that side of the street, on the side away from the hospital, you have a good enough connectivity system in the neighborhood that you just don't make a left out of this street, you make a left a block earlier or at some other location. So all that gets thought through when you put in a crossing island. Where is the best place for the island, and what changes would that bring about in the neighborhood where people just don't make lefts out of this location, they make them out of one that's a better place to make a left out of. So, did that answer your question? Okay. Thoughts, ideas, comments? Yes.
Bike lanes
Bike lanes.
on Putney Road going north. I don't know if you're familiar enough.
Putney, is that the one that goes out to?
It's Route 5 going north.
Oh, okay. I do know
That's
that.
pretty far, you know, it's the other side of town.
Yeah.
But on one side of Route 5, there's the plazas,
Okay.
Hannaford's, you know, and
Yeah.
all the big places. And there's a bike lane there.
There is a bike lane?
And, yeah, and if I'm going south, so that the plazas are on my right,
Okay.
I'm terrified of that bike lane. Because people on bikes seem to think that they have the right of way. Anyway, I'm not going to say all of them.
Yeah,
Just
some
the
do.
majority of them.
Some do.
And
Yeah.
they just whiz right through. And I'm telling you, someday I'm going to clobber one.
So are they passing you, you're going slow and they're passing you?
Or they're coming up on me, you know, I'm trying to watch, but sometimes they whiz in and out of traffic. I
Okay.
guess it's biker education or something that's needed. I
Well,
don't know.
there is a need for education, but what I will say is anything that's correctly designed often brings about correct use. And I'd have to look at it to say, oh yeah, well, here's your problem, you know. And
And I don't understand why they're told to ride with traffic, because the biker is at the mercy of the drivers. Even somebody getting out of their car, when you get out of your car,
yeah,
you open your door, and this has happened to me in Boston.
yeah,
Passenger side, open the door, bam! Bike came right into me. I'm not looking for a bike rider
Yeah.
at that point, you know.
yeah.
But if they're coming at you, they can see you, you
Yeah.
can see them. It's
Well, and I'll have to actually go and take a look after it gets daylight again and see for myself.
Yeah.
But I know bike lanes. I know how to design them and how not to
Good.
design them.
good.
So I'll take a look. Yes, yes, ma'am.
I had the horrible experience of being by the Walgreens on Fairground at Canal Street when a young man was walking across the street from Price Chopper and got hit and virtually bumped off the roof of a car, where I can see you have a valid point of leaving that area inaccessible for individuals to cross the street, and a very dangerous access. However, with that in mind, because that happened right there, we were very fortunate to have rescue right within a heartbeat away. If you put a roundabout in there, I'm concerned that that will lessen the time for the buses to get around it, as well as the ambulance to get to the hospital.
Well, a couple of very, very important points. The first is that is a natural desire line for people to cross from the Price Chopper over to Walgreens or vice versa, not get in their car just to drive across the street and hunt down another parking space. So there needs to be a good, legitimate crossing that's marked and a much better crossing than none. And on the roundabout, correct design and placement of the roundabout brings the speed down. So it greatly increases the yielding behavior for a motorist, for anyone who's using a crossing. So that solves the problem. In terms of the fire service, emergency responders getting through roundabouts, they tend to be much better for them than signals. And the reason is this, that with a roundabout, you rarely get any kind of a backup. The traffic just keeps moving all the time. The emergency responder still needs to have people pull over. If you have bike lanes, there's now a good place for people to pull over. If you have the turn lanes that are open, you're only going to use your crossing islands as islands. then the emergency responders can also go out into the islands in the mid-block sections. All I can say is that almost every time we put in a roundabout, we've been very thoughtful in our design. It's not been a negative for anyone who's trying to travel, whether it's a bus, a semi, or an ambulance, or a big piece of fire equipment. The roundabouts are designed to accommodate every type of vehicle. The type of roundabout you would need to go through that intersection would accommodate virtually every turning movements that you'd ever need. And so give it a real thorough examination, and you won't make a decision overnight. That's not in your 111 days. But I think you're going to find that that's a very powerful tool to put in at that location. Back here, yes.
Looking around the room, I see a lot of the same faces that we see in a lot of our planning studies, but I don't see DPW and the fire department and the police department.
Yeah.
I think we go ahead and we come up with some ideas, and then we sit down and the fire chief will say, I need a bigger radius. I need a wider lane.
Yeah.
And then traffic safety committee will just, kind of take some on-street parking away and all the things that we, I think we're all,
Sure.
or most of us are believers here, and our challenge is to get the.
Well, you're so right, and actually one of my last questions this evening is who wasn't here? Now, I don't know, did we get anyone either in the afternoon or tonight from the hospital?
No.
We're pretty sure we didn't get anyone from the fire service or police. And it's great to talk among yourselves. You need to do that. But you've got to have other sessions where all the right people get brought in. Now, just give an example. We were working in a town in Arkansas very recently on another AARP project. And the way we scheduled things, the city manager brought in his key staff for public works, for fire, for police, and so on. And by then we had a pretty good idea which direction the community wanted to go. So I did nothing more than a 10-minute presentation and was very careful to be very thoughtful about what the police would be interested in, what the fire service would be interested in, what sanitation would be interested in. And we got a total blessing, even though they were being hit fairly cold. Obviously, we need city administrators. We need all the right people to go forward with the project. But tonight was really to test it out, to see if it would stick. If you care for it and that you're willing to work for it, then there will need to be additional meetings and additional steps worked through. Yes, sir.
And as a follow-up to that comment, I don't think you're aware of this, but in fact, the roundabout up at exit 3, you're in a large part responsible for its presence, not its design, but its presence. It was the workshop that you and Michael Wallworth
Oh, really?
at
Okay.
V-Trans about 15 years ago, I think.
Okay.
And it was attended by, at that time, our Public Works Director, the Chair of the Select Board,
Yep.
the Town Manager, the Police Chief, and probably a lot of the people that were not present today. And
Okay.
when people were coming back, the Chair of the Planning Commission, when people were coming back, that formulated a lot of discussion in town about how we wanted our transportation system to occur.
Cool.
And because of the fabulous presentation that was given at that particular meeting, everybody was all on the same track.
That's great.
Everybody that attended that saw the same opportunities.
Great.
And it is important, I think, that kind of outreach takes place, and the people that are in that position of decision-making are privy to the ideas that you're putting out there. Otherwise, I think it...
Yeah. The process is what matters. The product we can all agree upon, we can fall in love with, but if we don't have the right process, then nothing sticks. Thank you for saying that.
And one other question, I'd like to get your thought on mid-block crosswalks in general, and then how they might relate to Canal Street as well.
Okay. Mid-block crosswalks are actually the safest place you can cross the street. When you get to a four-way intersection, you've got as many as 32 separate conflicts for motorists and 24 for pedestrians. You just follow through each of the turning arcs, you count them up. Mid-block, you can only have one conflict at a time if you have the mid-block island with it, right, the crossing island. Now, what we do know is if your speeds are too high, and yours are, then motorists do not yield at the rate that they should. So you can do one of two things. You can introduce special signalization or pulsing lights or some other measure, or do the kinds of treatments we were talking about, the gateways, get people to drive the quarter of the speed that it is supposed to be driven at, which is 25. At 25, there's a very high yield rate, and it just drops every 5 miles higher, and it drops significantly. But 25 is really what you want to strive for. Yes. Oh, I'm sorry.
That's all right.
Okay.
The 111-day plan with the 4 goals,
Yes.
is that to have, what is that, what's to happen, is that to have them committed to have, what is the vision of
Yes.
exactly what?
Thank you for asking.
Days if we say.
Yeah, in 111 days, and again, you were given 11 bonus days because of today.
Very slow.
Yeah. You should have something on the ground. And your first choice is to have a crossing, an actual crossing that's on the ground. That would involve an island. They're not expensive, but they will require collaboration with the state and people really getting the notion or the concept across, finding the right location, agreeing on the location, coming through a design. A really good engineer can have it designed and on the ground in, say, 40 days. It's not a big project. It can actually be constructed over one weekend. But it's got to be done right. It can't be a failure. It's got to be a success.
In the middle of the winter, it can be done?
That I can't answer. But what I can say is if this was a war and our lives depended on it, we'd have that on the ground despite the winter. We'd figure it out. Now, do you want to wait another 90 days? It's okay. You wouldn't be violating our rules. That, again, is the benefit of 111 days, is that winter can only last so long, right?
We don't know these days.
Now, yes.
Was there a particular reason for focusing today on the commercialized section of Canal Street as opposed to the more residential side of it?
I think so. A connector. And Sue, can you help us out? Because you guys did select the corridor.
Sure. We decided to work on the section from the hospital to Fairground because it builds on some other work that the Planning Commission has undertaken in working on the new town plan. So we had focused on the 4 commercial districts in town, and one of them was that part of Canal Street. And as a result of that, there was a citizen group, which some people in the room got involved with, to work on some beautification efforts. So we felt this was bringing back a plan from 2001, building on the commercial land use study that a consultant did, and furthering the efforts of the Gateway group, as well as some efforts that the hospital has done on beautification.
So the fact that this is kind of like the AARP sponsored project did not carry a lot of weight, because there are a lot of elderly and actually children that live in that residential stretch on Canal Street where those cars gather speed coming down Hospital Hill and go for it, all the way down to the light at the junction.
Well, I would say, I mean, we were considering that there's the hospital, the schools, there's 2 nursing facilities all in that area. There's shops and services that people might want to walk to. So that was another reason it was chosen.
Now, I know we didn't get to every one. Well, okay, we'll take one more comment or question. And then, Steve, would you help us out with, yes. So, would you go ahead?
Well, I just wanted to mention that the same principles that we're working on today for this stretch of Canal Street could be extended to the next section.
Yes. Absolutely. This is meant to be a model of what you can and should do in other parts of the community over time. And then, of course, what other Vermont communities should look to you for guidance for how you went about doing it. So, Steve, you want to make a few comments and an announcement? And we'll wrap very soon, folks. So, we like to end on time.
No. All right. Okay, so I'm Rod Francis. I'm the planning director, and again, thank you all for coming out tonight, and especially those people that spent the day with Dan and the AARP team. There was a good segue, the last question, to go over the next steps for us. We're hopeful that the implementation plan will be with us soon from Anita and Dan, and we already have one fairly new but small and very energetic community or neighborhood level group. We would be looking to reach out once we have the implementation plan in our hands to the key stakeholders. That would include what I've been referring to, I guess, as sort of the anchor property owners in the district. So that's the hospital, the school community, broadly speaking, the other large assisted living and nursing facilities that line Canal Street. And then also focusing our attention on the small business owners, some of whom we spoke with briefly today, but we would expect to continue that process through. We're particularly eager to see at least some physical link with this activity today, and I think that the pedestrian island or the median is a perfect example of that and something that we could achieve. I'm not sure about the frozen ground and the winter, but we think that it is something that's doable. The question that we have yet to resolve, but we know going forward is going to be challenging, is that there are a range of effectively federal fund-based grants that are operated through VTrans. Everyone knows that that's the State Highway Department, that VTrans is in pretty difficult circumstances with a bunch of commitments that they've made post-Irene. But we're hoping that the Transportation Enhancement Grant Program, for instance, will still be in place, and there'll be grant opportunities for us to seek to implement next steps for our plan. And so I invite all of you to do as Dan asked, indicate if you'd like to be a committee member or an assistant. We'll make sure that we put you on an email listserv. There you go. And maybe we can form another community group that's focused on implementing important changes in the Canal Street corridor. So, Steve.
I'm Kathleen from the Vermont Health Department, and I just wanted to let people know that there is a free workshop happening sponsored by the Health Department, one on the 18th of November in Rutland, the very same one on the 30th of November in Montpelier, and it's called Building Healthy Communities, and it's about kind of what we've talked about today, but the process of connecting public health issues, active living, healthy eating with the built community, and just how to collaborate with the people that need to be brought in. And so I think it could be useful for us in the process we're doing here to get a team of people to go and learn more about this kind of work. And there are people going either day. So I have some of the flyers, and I'll put them right up here if you're interested in looking at it and going. Okay.
Lastly, I'm Steve Fortier from the Meeting Waters YMCA, and with Kathleen, the co-leader of the Healthy Communities Coalition of Windham County. For about a year now, Josh, who's working with us with the coalition, Kendall, who's a member of the coalition from Windham Regional Commission, Sue and Rod, Kathleen and myself have been getting together to research and come up with a walking audit. And we've settled on one for a base level. And the reason we've done that, you've chosen this particular tool, is like we experienced today. I think that the seniors that were in the room, the members of AARP, are fantastic advocates in our community right now. And I think the other set that we can really tap into are the young people in our community. So we chose a tool that's basic enough that even elementary school students with their parents could use. The walking school bus group from Green Street School can take one of these assessments with them some morning look at their experience of walking to school through the lenses of these very basic set of questions. I think for those of us that took part in the workshop today, stretches of roads we walk often, and we just look at it in a very, very different way. With the Fit and Healthy Kids Coalition just a week ago, we walked from here to the Boys and Girls Club, to across the Whetstone Bridge, to the co-op, and saw things that, I do that so often, and we saw things in a very different way. So if you'd like to take a tool, help yourself, and what I'd encourage you to do is, with whatever organization you might be involved with, give us a call, and Josh, myself, Kathleen, and let us know that you're wanting to use it with a larger group, and we can show up and just coach you a little bit on the use of it, and make sure that we're actually collecting the data. After that, Sue and Rod from the town will help us to take a look at some hot spots and probably use a more sophisticated tool to take a look at those. But we'll have gotten and developed a bunch of advocates that we may not have at our sides right now by using this particular tool. So these are up at the front as well. Thank you.
All right, thanks a lot. So right here, you've got pens. For lack of a better term, I'm calling it the steering committee, but these are the folks that want to work on the 111-day strategy and then perhaps more. And plug into the great capacity you already have in your community with Steve Group and others, the folks with the town, to really take the next steps and see that you can actually implement a recommendation from a plan, which would be very exciting. So if you want to be a part of that, put your name here. Somebody will follow up with you. We're going to figure that out. Recommendations are going to come from Dan and Anita within 2 to 3 weeks. Is that fair to say? And then I think we're going to have a conversation with the town folks and with others in the community that are active on this, figure out how we can get this broadly disseminated in the town, maybe get it before the select board, get the right people that this gentleman here was mentioning on board with some of the recommendations so that you can take the next steps. And AARP, we have a chapter here, as Steve mentioned. Many of our chapter members participated in the activity today, but we also have a state office that is very committed to bringing a type of capacity we can to help you take the next steps as well. So you have a lot to work with here, including yourselves. You have a wonderful, vibrant community with active, caring people, and I think you really can take the next steps, not just here on Canal Street, but hopefully using this model to apply some of these same principles to other parts of the community. So thank you very, very much for participating, and please, please, please put your name on the list to help out, because we need a few people that will take ownership of these ideas and take them through to completion. So thanks so much for coming, and have a great night.
Thank you.